You know, parenting is a tough job at the best of times. It can often be even more challenging once our kids become teenagers. Today's guest uses humor to help parents in raising their kids. Ken Swarner is author of the book, Why Did God Give My Kids Free Will? He could have waited until they moved out. Ken joins us now from just outside of Seattle, Washington. Ken, welcome to Bridge City News.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
By the way, that's a great title for a book. How did you come up with the title and what inspired you to write it?
Well, so I've been parenting continuously for 30 years. My youngest just graduated this year from high school. And so, the transition for me from who I was when my first was born to developing my relationship stronger with God, to I get to the finish line, at least with kids living at home. I learned a few things in that time. And one thing was that God loved my kids so much, he gave them free will. And that really became a cornerstone for me to understand this relationship, that it's my kids' free will, not my will.
Now, our children were given free will by God, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we should stand by and let them throw eggs and tomatoes at the neighbor's house. Might you make a nice omelet by doing that? So how do we find the right balance in this?
I think it's about holding our kids accountable, but also understanding that if they don't go through those processes, how do they learn to be great adults and great Christians? So that free will part is where I believe God's giving them the opportunity to try some things out. Maybe they don't all go well, and then learn through the consequences of those actions so that when they become adults, they're way better prepared for what life is going to throw at them.
I'm a parent myself. My kids are now in their mid-20s. It surprises me how quickly the time flies by when you're raising your children. But as parents, we also always want to offer a healthy structure, but we want to make sure that we're not too controlling or smothering our children. So how do we go about doing that, in your opinion?
Yeah, control is a huge issue. It's one of the biggest ones, is learning to give that, or remember that the person in control is God, right? Not me. And that he's guiding them. My job is to model good Christian behavior, good adult behavior, to be a loving father, to love them unconditionally. And remember that they're watching. What I say has no bearance. What it really comes down to is what I do.
So, and incorporating humor, I guess, is vital in raising our kids. Learn to laugh at ourselves as we're laughing at the kids, as we're all laughing together, right?
Yeah, and teaching them to laugh at themselves, to understand that life is a series of trying things out, for finding our place in the world, and understanding not to take everything so seriously. And so the more they can laugh at themselves, the less they fall into those traps of shame or humiliation. It's about humility and obedience to God. But I think God gave us humor for a reason, and I want them to embrace that.
It's good to embrace that and laugh at certain situations, certain scenarios. But Ken, what happens if you see your child going down the wrong path, a path that maybe you went down when you were a child and it ended in destruction? It didn't end positively. And you're like, I don't want you going down that path. But as a parent, you have to be hands off, say they have to learn on their own and they have to experience things on their own.
Well, I think they have to accept the consequences. But what I found was the more honest I am with them about all the things when I missed the mark, and how I learned from that and what I did to rectify, apologize, whatever the process was, for them to see that, dad's been down this road too, and here's how he handled it. And let me tell you, kids love to hear stories about dad making mistakes.
Oh, yeah.
They really stop and pay attention.
Yeah, I tell my kids some of the mistakes I made in college. Now I turned things around and then, graduated, with really good marks, but it didn't start off that way. And so they're like, you know what? I don't want to make that mistake, Dad. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. So, Ken, it appears as though fathers may have a lot of influence in their children's lives, especially when it comes to spirituality. Now, you mentioned a study that revealed that when mom goes to church regularly, but dad only attends every so often, only 3.4% of kids in that environment will actually become regular churchgoers. But if dad goes to church all the time and mom never goes, 44% of kids will grow up to become regular churchgoers. Why do you think that is?
I think going to church requires, a certain amount of humbleness and softness and obedience. And, everybody expects mom, to be, more faithful and getting to church and keeping the house clean and keeping us all from killing ourselves. And so they become a little bit like white noise, right, for the kid. But when dad does it, it's like, whoa, look what dad just did. They really take notice of that. And I just believe it stops them in their tracks and they give it more time to think about than if mom just does it.
Maybe the kids are thinking there's a lot of credibility with this because dad's making the time as well. So mom and
That's
dad
right.
may be together in unison, going to church and worshiping and praising and having that structure for the kids is very positive. Ken, I sometimes hear moms complaining that they may end up doing most of the bedtime prayers and the Bible reading with the kids and Bible studies. Any thoughts on why a lot of dads don't do this? Take that initiative?
Yeah, I think dads are so focused often on the outside, right? What dangers lurk out there, or we're just trying to push the family forward, leading from the tip of the spear. And we forget sometimes that how important what's going on inside the home is equally important. And again, it's about just humbling ourselves and showing the children. That it's so important that dad is there too, and it really backs mom up too, right? Because mom shouldn't have to shoulder that all on her own.
Let's talk a bit about the bond that fathers will have with their children and how important it is spending quality time with them. I'm thinking of the Harry Chapin song, The Cat's in the Cradle, you know?
Yeah, I grew up with that too, and I remember really reflecting on that. I think I'm part of that generation that really made the big shift for spending way more time with our kids. And I get it. I mean, if you weren't raised that way, my dad did a pretty good job, but he was gone a lot working and whatnot. Um, I can't imagine not having those relationships with my kids. But more importantly, I'm going to know these people a lot longer as adults than I will ever know them as children. And so the time I spent with them with kids is really just laying the groundwork for how we'll have adult relationships. If I didn't do that with my kids, it'd be so much harder for them to trust me and want to be a part of my life as adults. So it really pays off for the other 60 years I'll know them after their kids.
Ken, with a high cost of living and inflation right now, a lot of young people are struggling, and even as adults in their early to mid 20s, some of them have to move back home again. How is that dynamic different from when they were little, when they're moving back in with their parents?
Well, luckily, I haven't experienced that. Although I do have a 19-year-old that I'm trying to move up, into adulthood and out of the house. But I do find though that I have grandkids that live just around the corner from me, and it's about wanting to have relationships with those kids, but not wanting to be those kids' parents, right? They have parents, that's their job. My job as a grandpa is really awesome because I just get to love them unconditionally and be that one person in the world that no matter what happens, they can just come to me and feel loved. And I think that's awesome. And I think for families that have kids moving back, I think that's important to remember, your role. You don't have to take parenting back on again.
Are you one of those grandfathers that loads your grandkids up on sugar, gets them all hyper, and then sends them home?
Oh, it's the best part, right? You just get to be, yeah. As a father, I was so focused on parenting, and as grandparents, it's just great. I can just sit there on the floor and listen to their stories, and I love it.
Ken, we can sometimes become pretty judgmental of our children and even judgmental of other parents. Is that an unhealthy behavior?
Yeah, I think, deep down judgment is always about judging ourselves, right? It's so easy to see other parents and what they're doing and to start pointing a finger at what they're doing. But usually the things that bother us and other people are really the things that bother us about ourselves. And the minute I really started understanding that process, I found myself to be a lot less judgmental and way more supportive of other folks. I also found it really important to find some other parents that I didn't have to feel judged. We share all of our trials and tribulations with kids, and that camaraderie was super, super helpful.
So, any suggestions on what works best to influence your children to do what's right?
Yeah, there's a lot of studies that have been done that show that a parent's influence is really pretty small in a kid's life, where outside influences, genetics, those things play a much bigger role. And so for me, it was learning to model. They're watching what I do, not what I say. In fact, when I start lecturing, they're out, their eyes glaze over, they're not listening, but they are always seeing how I respond, what I talk about, who I judge, all of those things. Do I go to church? Those are the important aspects. So just model good behavior and your kids will follow.
Parents are human beings, and sometimes they'll get into a squabble with each other. They'll get into a fight in front of the children. They'll be yelling at each other. So, what advice do you give to mom and dad to avoid setting a bad example in that regard?
Always be a united force. If you're going to squabble or disagree, do it in private. I think the biggest compliment we got was when my oldest was a teenager, and he came and he told his mom that they got into some kind of discussion about going behind her back to talk to me. And my son said, that's worthless. You guys are always on the same sheet of music. And I loved hearing that, because that's exactly what kids feel safer when the rules are consistent, right? So if they're playing one parent off of the other, they actually are feeling really unsafe about that. They want a united force. Not that they won't keep trying, but really, when you boil it down to it, they feel safer and more loved when the parents are on the same sheet of music.
Yeah, being on the same page is vital, absolutely. Showing that united front together as a family. Ken, the teenage years can be quite a challenge. I remember myself when I was a teenager being kind of a tyrant to my parents, and then my kids as they became teenagers, some of the challenges we had. What are some of the do's and don'ts for parents, especially when it comes to disciplining our children?
Yeah, again, remembering that you're raising adults, not children, is super important, because when you understand that, then you realize that the consequences that you give are so important, right? I think sometimes we're so afraid that our child's not gonna like us, or what are people gonna say when they hear your child got in trouble? But those things you want to kind of put aside. What you really want is your child to learn from experiences, accept the accountability, figure their way. What do they need to do to get out of that situation, make up for it, or whatever, apologize, all those things. It's so important to hold them accountable. And it's really hard sometimes, because my 19-year-old came to me the other day to show me his broken cell phone. Now that's like losing a limb for a teenager, right? And I knew what he was saying. He's showing me this phone because he wants me to buy him a new one. And he just got all this graduation money that he blew through in just like 1 week. And I wanted to get him a new phone so badly, because I hated seeing the panic in his eyes that his phone was dead. But I didn't. I said, hey, I feel confident in you that you'll raise that money in a job in no time. And he's still not really talking to me yet, but he knows he's got to do this, and he's capable to figure this out. So anyway, that's the part. Hold them accountable, let them fail, and they will surprise you.
Ken, there's often a gray area too. We talk about being your children's friend, but at the same time being their parent, to be able to offer the structure and potential discipline down the road, but just to help mentor, teach, and coach them. That's kind of a gray area. So when do you go from being the friend back to the parent, and then back again to being a friend?
Yeah, even with my adult kids, I never think of myself as their friend. I'm always their dad. Now, granted, I don't have to worry if they're cleaning their room or can make their rent payment or any of those. Those are great pressures to get off my shoulders. They're adults, they know what to do. And I love that part. So we do get to spend more time like friends. But at the end of the day, I'm their dad. And I want them to know that regardless of what happens in their life, there is one person in this world who will love them unconditionally, and we all need that. We need that somebody in our lives who we can just go to and share our feelings and not be lectured to. And that's what I want to be.
Ken Swarner is the author of Why Did God Give My Kids Free Will? He could have waited until they moved out. Thanks so much for joining us today from just outside of Seattle, Washington.
Thank you so much.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.